Welcome back to the deep dive. We are jumping right back in today.
Yeah, it's really good to be here again.
And if you are just joining us for the first time, you have basically walked right into the middle of something pretty massive. We are currently on leg 3 of our marathon here.
Right, the third installment of our 20-part series dissecting the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC.
Exactly. And, 20 parts sounds completely daunting.
It really does.
But honestly, when you start to peel back the layers of this specific project, 20 deep dives almost feels like we are rushing it.
Oh, I agree completely. I mean, the sheer scale of the source material we are working with just demands this kind of time.
It does. So just to orient everyone, in part 1, we set the historical stage. Then in part 2, our last discussion, we looked at the asphalt and the steel.
The transportation network.
Right, the physical arteries of trade. We talked all about how you actually move goods from the high mountains in the north down to the deep sea ports in the south.
Which is obviously crucial. I mean, you literally cannot have trade without transport.
Yeah.
That is just logistics 101.
It is. But here is the thought that just kept nagging me after we wrapped up that last discussion.
Okay.
You can build the most magnificent, perfectly paved, pothole-free highway in the world. And you can build a state-of-the-art industrial zone right next to it.
Sure.
But if you flip the switch on the factory floor...
And absolutely nothing happens.
Exactly, nothing happens. Then what do you have?
Well, you have essentially just built a very, very expensive parking lot.
Right, because nothing moves without power. It is the invisible infrastructure that makes the visible infrastructure worth anything at all.
Which brings us to today.
Yes. Today, our mission is to look at the spark plug of this entire economic engine. We're doing a deep dive into energy.
And I want to stress, for you listening, this isn't just a dry story about wires and pylons and grid mechanics.
Not at all.
This is arguably the most dramatic chapter in the entire CPEC saga. We are talking about a country that went from literal darkness, and I mean crippling economy-destroying blackouts, to actually having a surplus of power generation.
And all of that in less than a decade.
Yes. The speed of it is staggering.
It's a pendulum swing that is almost hard to wrap your head around. So to guide us through this today, we are leaning very heavily on a comprehensive analysis from Save Invest Compound.
A phenomenal report.
It really is. The report is titled Energy Projects Under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a transformation of Pakistan's power landscape. And this was published just recently in February 2026.
It's a fantastic resource for us because it gives us the ultimate benefit of hindsight.
Right, because we are sitting here in 2026.
Exactly. Looking back at critical policy decisions that were made in 2014 and 2015, we can objectively see what worked, what absolutely didn't, and financially speaking, where the bodies are buried.
Where the bodies are buried. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But before we get into the megawatts and the billions of dollars of debt, I actually want to start with a feeling. I want you, the listener, to imagine a specific scenario.
Set the scene.
Imagine it is July. It is 40 degrees Celsius out, which is over 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Brutal heat.
Brutal. And you are trying to run a textile factory. You have major international orders to fill. The clock is ticking on your shipping deadlines. And suddenly the power goes out.
And it doesn't just blink. It doesn't come back on for 2 hours.
Right.
And then maybe it comes on for 45 minutes. And then it goes right back out for another 3 hours.
That creates a level of anxiety that is, I think it's hard to describe if you haven't lived through it.
It is total chaos. It breaks the rhythm of daily life, and it absolutely shatters the rhythm of business. And that was the baseline reality we need to start from today.
So give us the roadmap for this deep dive. We are starting in the dark. Where exactly are we going?
We're going to trace the journey right from that crisis point. First, we will look at what the report calls the coal rush.
The very controversial decision to burn dirt just to keep the lights on?
Exactly. Then we will pivot to the water battery, the massive hydro projects that serve as the actual long-term solution.
Okay.
And finally, we have to look at the bill.
The financial hangover.
Yes, because while the lights are currently on, the cost of keeping them on has created a whole new, entirely different crisis. A debt trap that is actively threatening to swallow the broader economy whole.
It's the classic monkey's paw scenario, isn't it? You get exactly what you wish for, but the price is never what you expect it to be.
There is no such thing as a free megawatt. That really should be the motto of this entire analysis.
I love that. So let's rewind the clock. Take us back to the pre-CPEC era. We were talking roughly 2013, 2014, maybe early 2015. What exactly did the data say about Pakistan's energy sector?
The data was essentially screaming emergency. The exact phrase used in our source material is a nation in the dark.
Which sounds poetic, but it's really not.
No, it is statistical fact. Around 2013, the gap between the electricity people actually needed and the electricity the country could reliably produce was somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 megawatts.
I want to pause on that specific number. 6,000 megawatts.
Yeah.
For a listener who isn't, say, an electrical engineer, help us visualize that scale. Is that a lot of power to be missing?
It is massive. To give you a rough benchmark, a decent-sized modern nuclear power plant generates about 1,000 megawatts.
Okay.
So Pakistan was effectively missing 6 nuclear power plants worth of energy every single day.
Wow. And when you were missing that much baseload power, the grid just can't function normally. You can't just run everything a little bit dimmer.
No, physics doesn't allow that. You have to cut people off entirely to protect the system from collapsing.
So the grid operator has to make really hard choices.
Right. They institute what is called load shedding. In major cities like Lahore or Karachi, which are the economic hubs, the places where the banks and the major stock markets are, you were looking at 8 to 10 hours a day without any power.
That is an entire full workday.
Yeah.
Just imagine an office building where the computers only work for half the shift.
Exactly. And the crazy thing is, that was the good scenario.
The good scenario.
Yeah, because if you went out to the rural areas, the villages, the agricultural heartlands where all the food is grown and the cotton is harvested, the load shedding there was 12 to 16 hours a day.
How does a modern economy function like that?
It doesn't. That is the really short answer. Industrial output just plummeted during this window.
Because if you are a factory owner, you cannot run a continuous shift.
Exactly. Your machines stop abruptly, your raw material gets ruined in the machines, and your workers are just sitting around in the dark waiting.
And I imagine if you are a foreign investor, say a Japanese automotive manufacturer or a German chemical company, you look at that specific grid data and you just fly right past Pakistan.
You don't even land the plane. Why would you build a multi-million-dollar factory in a place where you have to essentially bring your own power plant just to operate? It totally defeats the purpose of outsourcing or expanding.
Right. And for the locals, the small business owners, the tailors, the local shopkeepers, the barbers, they were forced to rely on backup diesel generators just to keep their doors open.
Which, as you know, are incredibly loud, they smell terrible, and they are extremely expensive to run.
I assume it completely destroys their profit margins. You are burning highly refined diesel fuel just to power a couple of light bulbs and a fan.
Extortionately expensive. So the entire SME sector, the small and medium enterprises, was actively being strangled. The backbone of the domestic economy was snapping under the pressure.
So we clearly have a massive supply problem. But why? Was it just that previous governments simply hadn't built enough power plants over the decades, or was something fundamentally broken in the mechanics of the system itself?
It was a bit of both, honestly. But the structural tiller, the thing that was really dragging them down, is something the report calls the fuel trap.
The fuel trap. Unpack that concept for us.
Sure. So back in 2013, over 60% of Pakistan's electricity came from thermal power plants. And these plants ran on imported furnace oil.
Furnace oil. It sounds incredibly antique.
It is the absolute bottom of the barrel stuff. Literally, it is the residual sludge from refining. It's thick, it's highly polluting, and it's expensive to transport.
Right.
But the core problem wasn't just the environmental pollution, as bad as that was. The real issue was the macroeconomic trap. Pakistan simply doesn't produce enough of its own oil.
So they had to import almost all of it.
Exactly. Which means you are essentially paying for your country's basic daily electricity needs in US dollars.
And if global oil prices go up,
Your national electricity bill goes up. Instantly, you have zero buffer.
and if we remember the 2008 to 2014 period, global oil prices were historically high and wildly volatile.
Yes. So Pakistan was essentially importing massive inflation. Every single time someone flipped a light switch in Islamabad, the central bank was bleeding precious foreign currency reserves to buy oil from the Gulf.
This feels like a remarkably fragile way to run a country of over 200 million people. You are completely at the mercy of global commodity markets.
It was entirely unsustainable. And this specific dynamic led directly to the phenomenon that still haunts Pakistan to this very day, which is circular debt.
Yes, circular debt. We see this term constantly when looking at South Asian economic analysis. It sounds like a merry-go-round, but an incredibly depressing one. What is it really on a mechanical level?
Think of it like a massive national chain of IOUs.
Okay, an IOU chain.
Right. Start at the bottom. You have the power distributor, the local company that actually sends the electric bill to your house. They are supposed to collect money from the end consumer.
Which is me.
Exactly. But maybe you don't pay your bill. Or maybe someone in your neighborhood steals electricity by throwing a metal hook over the main transmission wire.
Which, the report notes, is quite common.
Very common. Or, perhaps the biggest factor, the government steps in and tells the distributor, do not charge the consumer the full actual price of the power. We will subsidize it because we want the voters to be happy.
But then the government delays paying that promised subsidy to the distributor.
Precisely. So the distributor ends up severely short on cash. They simply do not collect enough money to cover the power they distributed.
So they cannot pay their bill to the actual power plant that generated the electricity.
Right. And then the power plant operator says, well, I cannot buy my next shipment of furnace oil if I don't get paid for the last batch of electricity I generated.
So the power plant doesn't pay the domestic oil supplier.
And the domestic oil supplier, starved of cash, cannot pay the international import bill to get the oil ships to unload at the port.
So the whole chain freezes.
Yeah.
Everyone owes everyone else money.
And the power plants literally just sit idle. This is the ultimate tragic irony of the 2013 crisis. Pakistan actually had some fully functional power plants that were sitting there turned off.
Not because they were broken.
No, perfectly fine. They were turned off simply because nobody in the chain had the actual liquid cash to buy the fuel to run them.
That is absolutely maddening. You have the hardware, but you are trapped in a financial gridlock.
A total paralysis of liquidity. And by 2013, this specific pile of circular debt was over 400 billion Pakistani rupees.
So that is the starting line for our story today. A 6,000 megawatt deficit, 16-hour blackouts, and a 400 billion rupee debt crater.
And massive public anger. There were riots in the streets, people were burning tires, protesting the utility companies. The government at the time knew that if they didn't fix this immediately, the state itself was at risk of severe destabilization.
The consensus among global analysts at the time was pretty grim, right?
Very grim. They believed the economy would completely stagnate or even collapse if this wasn't structurally overhauled.
Enter CPEC.
Enter the massive Chinese investment vehicle in 2015.
Right. Now, when the CPEC agreements were initially signed, energy was really the headline, wasn't it? We talk a lot about the roads and the port at Gwadar. But the energy portfolio was essentially the do-or-die component of the whole corridor.
It absolutely was. You can't run a port without power.
Yeah.
And the strategy they adopted here seems to have been very specific and very aggressive.
The report calls it a strategy of triage.
Triage, just like in a hospital emergency room.
Walk us through that mindset.
When a patient is brought in bleeding out from a severed major artery, the doctor does not stand there and lecture them about their cholesterol levels and the need for a long-term Mediterranean diet.
Right, you just stop the bleeding.
You apply a tourniquet.
Yeah.
The Pakistani government and the Chinese planners looked at the grid and decided that raw speed was the only metric that mattered right then. They needed baseload power, and they needed it yesterday.
And what is the fastest way to generate massive amounts of steady baseload power from scratch?
You build coal plants.
Coal.
Yeah.
Now, in 2015, the rest of the world, or at least the Western world, was already starting to really hammer the end of coal narrative. Climate change was front and center. But Pakistan essentially went all in on coal.
They did, and the report breaks this down impartially. From a strictly engineering and timeline perspective, you can completely understand why they made that choice.
Because of the construction speed.
Yes. You can build a massive gigawatt-scale thermal coal plant in 24 to 36 months if you push hard.
Okay.
But a large hydroelectric dam, that takes 10 to 12 years. They didn't have 12 years. With the riots in the streets, they didn't even have 12 months, politically speaking.
So this kicks off phase one of the transformation, the coal fix. Let's look at the actual titans of this phase. The source material highlights the Sahiwal coal power project extensively.
Sahiwal is a fascinating case study. It is located in Punjab, which is the agricultural heartland of the country. It has a capacity of 1,320 megawatts.
That is huge.
It is. But what makes Sahiwal legendary in the global construction world is the sheer speed. They built this massive facility in record time, actually finishing well ahead of the incredibly aggressive scheduled completion date.
The report mentions it was basically a 24/7 sprint.
Thousands of workers, day and night.
And 1,320 megawatts, that knocks out roughly 20% of that massive national deficit in one single shot.
Exactly. It was a massive statement of intent. It told the market, we can actually fix this.
And Sahiwal wasn't alone. You also have the Hubco project down in Balochistan, also
Mhm.
1,320 megawatts.
Right. Now, Hubco is interesting to contrast with Sahiwal because of the complex logistics involved. Sahiwal is way inland, which means they have to put all the imported coal onto trains at the port and rail it hundreds of miles north.
Which ties up the rail network we talked about in episode 2.
Exactly. Everything connects. But Hubco sits right on the coast.
So how does their supply chain work?
They built a dedicated deep water jetty specifically for the power plant. They bring in these massive coal barges, mostly importing from South Africa or Indonesia.
Okay.
The ships dock, they unload the coal directly onto a massive conveyor belt system, and it goes straight into the burners. Highly efficient logistics.
So boom, Sahiwal comes online, Hubco comes online. There was also Port Qasim. Suddenly, thousands of megawatts are hitting the national grid in a very condensed window. What was the actual impact on the ground for the average person?
The relief was visceral. In those major industrial hubs we talked about, Lahore, Faisalabad, Karachi, the blackouts dropped dramatically almost overnight.
That must have felt like a literal miracle to those factory owners.
It was a game changer. Factory owners who were struggling along at 50% capacity could suddenly ramp up a third shift and run at 100%.
And the macroeconomic numbers reflected this, right?
Yes. National GDP growth ticked up significantly during those specific years. The bleeding had been stopped. The patient was stabilized.
And here's where the report asks us to be critical. We essentially just traded one addiction for another, didn't we?
We absolutely did. We cured the fuel trap of relying on imported furnace oil by walking right into the import trap of relying on imported coal.
Because at that time, Pakistan didn't have a high-grade coal of its own to burn.
Not the specific type of high caloric value coal these particular plants were designed for initially.
Right.
So we are still importing the primary fuel, we are still paying for it in US dollars, and we are still completely exposed to global commodity shocks.
Meaning, if the price of coal suddenly doubles in Australia or Indonesia, the cost of generating a single kilowatt in Islamabad jumps.
Exactly. The vulnerability to global markets was not solved, it just changed flavors.
And then there is the elephant in the room that the report addresses, the environmental impact.
It's a very dirty fix. There is no way around that reality. Sahiwal, for example, is sitting right in the middle of a highly fertile agricultural belt.
Which raises obvious concerns.
Yes. The report details the significant debates that sparked regarding air quality, the disposal of toxic coal ash, and the massive amounts of water these plants require for cooling. Coal is incredibly carbon intensive.
It sets up a really difficult moral and policy calculus. The argument is essentially, we need power right now to employ people and feed families, versus we're poisoning the air and water those same families rely on.
It is a brutal trade-off. And the planners at the time, and the report is careful just to report their rationale impartially, they would argue that a country needs basic economic growth first before it can afford the luxury of advanced environmental protection.
It was a deeply utilitarian decision.
Exactly. They chose lights over lungs in a sense because the alternative was economic collapse.
So the immediate panic is subsiding. The grid is stabilized. And this allows the policy strategy to finally shift gears. This brings us to phase 2.
The pivot to hydro.
The long game. Now, the report points out that Pakistan has something highly unique in its geography, the Indus River Cascade.
It is truly one of the greatest river systems in the world. It starts high up in the Himalayas and crashes down through the mountains all the way to the Arabian Sea.
And the potential energy in that falling water is just astronomical.
It's arguably Pakistan's single greatest natural resource. It is a perpetual motion machine if you can harness it.
So the obvious question the report tackles is, why wasn't this the plan from day one? Water is free. Gravity is free. Why burn expensive Indonesian coal at all?
Because while the water is free, dams are incredibly expensive to build, and they are notoriously agonizingly slow.
Right, you mentioned 10 to 12 years earlier.
And beyond the engineering, they are political nightmares.
Political in what way? Between countries.
Internally, actually, water rights are fiercely contested. In Pakistan, just as in the American West or anywhere with arid regions, the internal provinces fight over water allocations constantly.
I see.
If you propose building a massive dam upstream, the agricultural communities downstream immediately suspect you are going to steal their irrigation water to fill your reservoir.
Oh, so there's a massive trust deficit.
Huge. So for decades, basically since the 1970s, no government had the political capital or the financial stamina to push through these big dam projects.
But the arrival of CPEC fundamentally changed the financial stamina part of that equation.
It brought the checkbook. It provided the long-term, patient capital required to actually bore through mountains. And the report highlights several of these massive water battery projects.
Let's get into the specifics. Karo, Suki-Kenari, and the massive Dasu Dam. I want to start with Karo. It sounds like a vegetable, but it is an absolute beast of an engineering project.
The Karat Hydropower Project. It's located on the Tulam River, and it boasts 720 megawatts of capacity.
And this one is notable financially, too.
Yes. The report emphasizes that this was actually the very first major investment made by the Silk Road Fund, and it is fully operational today.
But what about Suki-Kenari?
That one is situated in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, deep up in the rugged mountains, 870 megawatts.
Okay.
This is what engineers call a high-head project. That means they capture the water and let it drop from a very significant height through long tunnels to spin the turbines at the bottom.
The pressure must be immense.
It is. The civil engineering required to drill those tunnels through active seismic mountain ranges is just mind-boggling.
What I really love about the hydro section of this report is how it breaks down the economic logic. You mentioned the levelized cost of energy in our pre-show notes. Can you explain that concept for the listener who might not be a financial analyst?
Sure. Think of it like the difference between renting a house and buying a house. A thermal coal plant is like renting. The upfront cost to build it is relatively lower, but you have to pay rent, which is your imported coal fuel cost, every single month forever. And the landlord can raise the rent whenever global markets spike.
Right.
A hydroelectric dam is like buying the house with cash. It costs an absolute fortune up front. Billions of dollars poured into concrete and steel over a decade.
But once it is finally built.
Once it is built, your monthly cost drops to almost zero because the water flowing through the turbines is free.
So when you average the cost out over 20 or 30 years, the levelized cost, the electricity from a dam, is dirt cheap compared to coal.
Exactly. It fundamentally stabilizes the basket price of power for the whole country. It acts as a massive physical hedge against global inflation.
Because when oil and coal prices spike globally, your hydro generation costs stay completely flat.
Right. It is the ultimate economic insurance policy for a developing grid.
The source material mentions that before CPEC, hydro made up only about 30% of Pakistan's energy mix.
True. And concerningly, that share had actually been shrinking as demand grew and only thermal plants were added.
So what is the goal now?
The strategic goal of integrating Karo, Suki-Kenari, Dasu, and eventually the massive Dimer-Basha Dam is to push that hydro share much, much higher. The more cheap water power you blend into the grid, the more you lower the average cost of electricity for every citizen.
But CPEC didn't just stop at coal and hydro, did it? We also saw a significant push into modern renewables.
Yes. Solar and wind generation.
I want to touch on the Quaidi-Azam Solar Park. I remember seeing drone footage of this facility a few years ago. It literally looks like a vast, shimmering blue ocean sitting right in the middle of a harsh desert.
It is an incredible site. It is located down in Bahawalpur, and it is scaled to be one of the largest continuous solar parks in all of Asia.
What is the capacity there?
They targeted an installed capacity of over 1,000 megawatts.
A gigawatt of solar. That is serious scale. And what about wind energy? Pakistan isn't traditionally known for wind farms.
No, but they have a massive natural advantage in the south. The Jampir Wind Corridor in the Sindh province.
The report calls it a natural wind tunnel.
It really is. The geography funnels constant, high-speed coastal winds right through that corridor. CPEC facilitated major Chinese technology transfers and joint ventures to put up literal forests of modern wind turbines out there.
The statistic in the Save Invest Compound report that totally blew my mind was a baseline for renewables. Before CPEC, what was the percentage?
Less than 2%.
Less than 2% of the national energy mix. It was basically a rounding error on a spreadsheet.
It was virtually non-existent. But now, post-CPEC, it is a significant and steadily growing wedge of the pie.
And I imagine that helps diplomatically, too.
Absolutely. Adding thousands of megawatts of green energy helps balance out the severe carbon emissions from the early phase coal plants. which is incredibly crucial for Pakistan's international standing when negotiating climate agreements.
Now, there is one more critical piece of the energy puzzle in this report that I think casual observers often completely overlook. We naturally equate energy with electricity. But energy isn't just what comes out of the wall socket. It is also industrial fuel.
Ah, yes. The gas network.
Right. Factories need raw gas for their boilers. Homes need gas for winter heating and cooking. And Pakistan was rapidly running out of its own domestic natural gas reserves. So CPEC stepped in here as well with LNG infrastructure.
Liquefied natural gas. This was a vital lifeline. They financed and constructed state-of-the-art terminals at the southern ports to receive these giant, specialized tankers.
Ones carrying supercooled liquid gas from Qatar or elsewhere.
Exactly. The terminals receive the liquid, regasify it, turn it back into a usable vapor, and then pump it through newly constructed CPEC pipeline networks all the way up to the industrial north.
And the report notes this essentially saved the massive textile industry just as much as the new power plants did.
Without a doubt. You simply cannot dye large volumes of fabric without industrial steam, and you cannot make that steam cost-effectively without reliable gas.
So connecting the import terminals and the resource-rich areas in Balochistan to the manufacturing zones in Punjab and Sindh was just vital.
It solved a totally separate but equally destructive energy shortage.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. We are standing here analyzing this in 2026. If we look at the raw physical scorecard from 2013 to now, the sheer transformation is undeniable.
It is a massive hardware triumph. You look at the grid numbers generation capacity went from about 22,000 megawatts to well over 36,000 megawatts in less than a decade.
That is over a 60% jump. I mean, most developed nations do not grow their grid capacity by 60% in 50 years, let alone 10.
And the impact on the daily lifestyle of the population is very real. If you live in a major city like Islamabad or Lahore today, you are no longer planning your family dinners or your business meetings around the daily power cuts.
The predictability has returned.
Right. And rural electrification has expanded to reach millions of homes that never had reliable power before. The darkness has physically retreated.
Okay, that is the victory lap. High fives all around for the engineers.
Yes.
Now we have to look at the hangover.
The painful morning after.
We successfully built the Ferrari. We have the horsepower. But the question the report asks is, can we actually afford to put gas in the tank? Or pay the insurance premium?
This is the real sting in the tail of the CPEC energy story, the financial hangover.
Let's get into the weeds on how these massive projects were actually paid for, because I think there is a huge misconception globally that China just came in and gave this infrastructure to Pakistan as foreign aid.
Oh, definitely not. We need to clear that up right now. These were absolutely not charitable gifts. These were strict commercial investments.
Driven by loans and IPP contracts.
Right, independent power producer contracts.
Explain how those work in this context.
To get a massive Chinese state-owned enterprise, or honestly, any foreign company, to come and build $1 billion power plant in Pakistan in 2015, when the country was financially unstable and facing terrorism threats, you had to aggressively sweeten the deal.
You had to guarantee that they wouldn't lose their shirt.
Exactly. You had to guarantee their risk. And the mechanism for that is what we call capacity payments.
Capacity payments. The report highlights this phrase. And from what I understand, this specific term makes every single macroeconomist in Pakistan wake up in a cold sweat.
It is the core of the current crisis. Let me give you an analogy to make it clear.
Please.
Imagine you need to ensure you always have a ride to work. So you hire a private taxi driver for the entire day.
Okay.
You sign a contract agreeing to pay him $100 for the day, whether you actually drive anywhere or not. You are paying him purely for his availability, for his capacity to drive you if you need it.
So if I end up just sitting at home all day and don't go anywhere, I still owe the driver the full $100.
Exactly. Under CPEC, Pakistan signed what are called take-or-pay contracts with these power producers.
Take or pay.
The government legally guaranteed to pay these new plants a fixed, very high rate for their total capacity to generate power, even if the government doesn't actually need to buy that electricity on a given day.
But why on earth would a government agree to terms like that?
Because nobody would lend the billions needed to build the plant otherwise. The Chinese banks required absolute certainty of revenue to approve the loans.
Okay, I see the trap forming.
Right. Because here is what happened. As Pakistan rapidly built more and more capacity, solving the deficit and actually pushing into a surplus, they started having significantly more electricity than the economy could actually consume.
Especially in the winter months, right?
Yes, when air conditioning demand plummets, the national demand drops by half. But the government still has to pay the proverbial taxi driver.
So they are paying billions of rupees for electricity. They aren't even pulling from the plants.
Billions of rupees essentially wasted, just handed over to keep the IPPs solvent and to honor the sovereign contracts.
And it gets catastrophically worse because of the currency mechanics, doesn't it?
Yes, the currency risk. This is the ultimate killer. The report details how these guaranteed returns and capacity payments are strictly indexed to the US dollar.
Walk us through that transaction. I am a citizen in Lahore. I pay my monthly electric bill in local Pakistani rupees.
Right, and the government distribution company collects those rupees. But, per the CPEC contracts, the government has to pay the Chinese investors their returns in US dollars.
And what exactly has happened to the value of the Pakistani rupee over the last 10 years?
It has depreciated massively. It has crashed.
So it takes way, way more rupees to buy a single dollar today than it did back when the contracts were signed in 2015.
Correct. So even if the actual operational cost of running the coal plant stays exactly the same, the cost of servicing that debt doubles or triples in local currency terms.
That is just terrifying math for a finance minister. It means the national energy debt is aggressively growing purely because of the exchange rate, regardless of what happens on the grid.
Exactly. It is entirely decoupled from actual electricity generation. And this brings us right back to our old friend from the beginning of the deep dive.
Circular debt.
Yes, the monster under the bed.
The report says that despite all this new generation, the circular debt grew from that initial 400 billion rupees to over 2.3 trillion rupees.
It exploded.
But why? If we finally have enough power, why is the debt getting exponentially worse?
Because the CPEC interventions only fixed the hardware. They built beautiful, modern power plants.
But they didn't fix the software.
Exactly. The distribution companies, the discos, are still fundamentally broken. They're still highly inefficient.
So they're still losing power to theft.
They lose 20 to 30% of the power generated to outright theft, billing failures, and technical line losses on old, degraded local wires. They still do not collect all the money owed to them.
So the government is essentially pouring highly expensive dollar-index champagne into a bucket that still has a massive hole in the bottom.
A very expensive, very leaky bucket. And because the fundamental cost of generation has become so astronomically high due to those dollar capacity payments, the government has to keep drastically raising the retail price of electricity just to try and plug the fiscal hole.
Which inevitably leads to what the report calls the affordability crisis.
Yes. We essentially went from a paradigm of we have absolutely no power to a new paradigm of we have plenty of power, but you literally cannot afford to turn on your air conditioner.
That has to be an incredibly bitter pill for the average consumer to swallow. You wait years for the blackouts to end, you finally get a stable connection, but the monthly bill eats up half your monthly salary.
It is crushing. And it creates a completely new kind of public unrest. People aren't in the streets protesting blackouts anymore.
What are they doing?
They are out in the streets burning their printed electricity bills because the utility costs more than their monthly rent. The public anger has shifted from availability to affordability.
So given all this, where does the country actually go from here? The Save Invest Compound Report outlines a future outlook section. Is there a viable path out of this specific trap?
There is a path, but the report makes it clear that it is incredibly narrow and requires ironclad political will. The core strategy moving forward is indigenization.
Indigenization.
Basically means
Stop importing fuel at all costs. Use only what you have domestically. We already talked about the massive push for more hydro. That is key for baseload. But there's also a massive pivot toward Thar coal.
Thar coal. Now, we need to clarify this. This is fundamentally different from the imported Indonesian or South African coal we talked about earlier with Sahwal and Hubco.
Entirely different. The Thar Desert, located down in the Sindh province, sits on top of one of the absolute largest untapped coal reserves in the entire world.
Why wasn't it used before?
Because it is what geologists call lignite coal, brown coal.
Meaning it's low quality. Very low quality. It has an extremely high moisture content. It is literally soggy when you dig it up. It is hard to burn efficiently, and it is highly polluting.
So if it's so terrible, why is it suddenly the savior of the energy sector?
Because it is physically located in Pakistan. You pay the miners in Pakistani rupees. You transport it in rupees. You burn it in domestic plants. Not a single U.S. dollar leaves the central bank to generate that electricity.
It completely decouples their basic energy security from the fluctuations of the U.S. dollar and global import markets.
Exactly. For the balance of payments crisis, Thar coal is essentially black gold.
Even with the environmental drawbacks.
Yes. The macroeconomic survival currently outweighs the carbon footprint concerns. The government is actively pushing hard to convert those older imported coal plants to run on domestic Thar coal instead.
And combined with a massive scaling up of solar and wind installations, what is the ultimate end game here?
The stated policy goal is total energy independence. The report suggests this is theoretically possible within the next 2 decades. But only if, and it is a massive if, the long-term policy remains consistent across changing governments, which is historically a challenge in Islamabad.
There is also a really fascinating mention in the report of regional connectivity, a project with a very sci-fi sounding name, CASA 1000.
Right, CASA 1000, Central Asia, South Asia 1000. It sounds like a droid from Star Wars, but it is actually a massive transnational high-voltage transmission line.
And what is the strategic concept behind it?
The idea is to directly connect Pakistan's grid northward to Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan.
Why those 2 specific countries?
Because they have the exact opposite seasonal energy problem compared to Pakistan.
How so?
Central Asia is highly reliant on hydro. In the peak of summer, when the deep snowpack melts in the Pamir Mountains, their dams overflow. They generate massively more power than their small populations can consume. They literally don't know what to do with the excess electricity.
And meanwhile, in Pakistan during the summer?
Pakistan is boiling hot. The air conditioning demand spikes and the grid strains under the load.
So it's a perfect match. We build a wire and buy their cheap summer hydro excess.
Exactly. And in the winter, when Central Asia freezes over and their rivers stop flowing, Pakistan, which has lower winter demand, could theoretically export thermal power back up north to keep them warm.
That is a beautiful vision of regional integration. Geopolitics through infrastructure, trading actual watts across borders instead of rhetoric.
It is the most rational way forward. It turns Pakistan into a regional energy hub rather than an isolated, struggling island grid. It stabilizes prices for everyone involved.
It really highlights how interconnected all these economic levers are.
Absolutely.
So, as we start to wrap up this incredibly dense deep dive, let's try to synthesize the big picture for the listener. This has been an absolute roller coaster of a decade for Pakistan.
It really has. Unprecedented change.
We started our timeline with a practically paralyzed nation. Factories shuttered, 16-hour blackouts in the villages, a profound sense of economic hopelessness.
Right. And then CPEC came in with the force of a sledgehammer. They bypassed the red tape, built the massive physical infrastructure, and forcefully pushed the entire national grid into a state of surplus.
From a purely engineering standpoint, it was a triumph.
An undeniable triumph of mobilization and construction.
But the bill has finally come due. The foreign-denominated debt is staggering, the capacity contracts are incredibly rigid, and the structural day-to-day inefficiencies of the local distribution grid are still actively rotting the financial system from the inside out.
The Save Invest Compound report sums this whole era up with a simple equation, a recipe for success.
What is the recipe?
Vision plus infrastructure plus policy.
Okay.
Pakistan had the urgent vision. With Chinese help, it successfully built the required infrastructure. But it fundamentally failed on the execution of the policy.
The policy being the deep governance reforms, the billing efficiency, stopping the theft, rationalizing the tariffs.
Exactly. You can go out and buy a state-of-the-art, supercritical coal plant from China. You cannot buy good domestic governance. You have to build that yourself the hard way.
That is a remarkably powerful takeaway. The physical hardware is ultimately the easy part. The institutional software is the hard part.
And upgrading that institutional software is the defining challenge for Pakistan over the next decade.
Well, here's a provocative final thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today. Think about this as you digest everything we've discussed.
Go ahead.
Pakistan has definitively proven to the world that it can pour millions of tons of concrete and erect thousands of miles of steel transmission towers. It has proven it can solve the hard physical engineering problems when its back is against the wall.
True.
But can it now solve the soft problems? The embedded political patronage, the local power theft, the deep bureaucratic mismanagement? Because until it finally does, that shiny new multi-billion-dollar power plant is really just a debt machine running quietly in the background.
And that is exactly the question that will determine if the CPEC energy portfolio is ultimately remembered by history as the nation's savior or as an unbearable financial burden.
Well, this entire discussion really puts the scope of our series into perspective. The roads and railways we covered in Episode 2 desperately need this reliable power to function.
They do.
But this massive abundance of power is essentially useless for economic growth if the local industries cannot actually afford to plug into it.
It is a completely interdependent system. You can't fix one piece in isolation.
And that reality leads us perfectly into our very next installment, Episode 4.
Yes. The logical next step, now that we have the physical roads from Episode 2 and we have the baseload power generation from Episode 3, what are they actually planning to build with all of this?
Exactly. We're going to dive deep into the industrial and special economic zones, the SEZs.
The manufacturing heart of the corridor.
Right. The localized tax-free zones, the massive new factories, the strategic places where the actual making of things is supposed to happen.
Yeah. Because that is where the rubber finally meets the road. Can Pakistan successfully translate this incredibly expensive, debt-heavy infrastructure into actual globally competitive exports? That is the multi-billion-dollar question.
I cannot wait to dig into the data on that one. It is going to be fascinating. Before we go today, I want to give a quick reminder to everyone to please check out the primary source material for this analysis.
Yes, the full report is excellent.
You can find it at saveinvestcompound.com. They have the detailed historical charts on the circular debt growth that will honestly make your eyes water, but they are absolutely essential reading if you want to understand South Asian macroeconomics.
I highly recommend reading it through.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us today and listening to the deep dive. We will see you next time for Episode 4.
Goodbye, everyone.